Hey, what's up, you guys, and welcome back to the Televised podcast. My name is Anna, and today we're going to be talking about The Haunting of Bly Manor, which honestly is a sentence that I never, ever thought that I would say. Okay, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm a big baby. I can't do horror. I can't do it. I can't. And I made a video, an podcast episode, around this time last year, basically saying how I just don't like horror, but I'm fascinated by it, but I can't watch it. So I was really apprehensive when so many people were recommending this show to me, but I think even if you don't like horror, I think this show is still worth it, because it's really not, I mean, Flora says it at the end, at the end of the end of the season, that it's not a ghost story, it's a love story, which that's what it is. It's a story about love, it's about grief, it's about possession, it's about just all of those, it's a story about the human experience that it seems like a lot of shows don't want to touch in a way, so it's phenomenal. I loved it. I absolutely adored it. I think also it goes without saying that this is going to include major spoilers for The Haunting of Bly Manor. And also, just to preface, I have never seen Hill House. That one is genuinely might be too scary for me. I'll just have to wait until I can watch it with somebody and not be scared, But I don't think I could do Hill House, at least not right now. Bly was definitely frightening enough for me. But before we get into actually talking about Bly, I do want to talk about the fact that it's been a minute. I obviously a couple weeks ago, I think it'll be 3 weeks ago now. Sorry. I put out my Supercorp episode that I worked really hard on, and I'm really proud of it, and I just want to seriously thank everybody for listening and for being so kind. I didn't get nearly as much hate as I expected that I would. I mean, the YouTube comments on that are so wholesome. I think the top comment is some guy someone who used to be a Carmel shipper, and basically saying that this video was convincing and that we deserve better, which is truly all I wanted from the video, was to validate Supercorp, and also to to maybe change someone's mind, if they're on the fence, because I feel somebody who hates Supercorps and everything, I'm not going to change their mind, but somebody who maybe used to like Carmel and now just continues watching the show casually, I could change their mind, and I think I did. And I'm really proud of it, and I genuinely cannot thank everyone enough for the support. Right now it's actually sitting at 2.3k views on YouTube, and my listens on Apple Podcasts and Spotify have been amazing. So I thank you so much for the support. And I didn't want to come back too soon with a new episode, just as to not kill the momentum of the Supercorp video. I wanted it to sit for a while, but so yeah, if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, please go check it out. I loved it. I loved making it, and I just hope that people like it. The main thing anyway is I want people to be able to take away either, like I said, validation or education or a changed mind or whatever. That's all I want from that episode. So I just thank you guys so much for the support. I don't want to get cheesy or anything, but it really genuinely means the world to me. So oh, and really quick also too, I'm going to talk about this a bit later. when I talk about Netflix. But I am working on an episode kind of like that Supercorp one. This one's obviously going to be more casual. That's how my episodes normally are. I don't script things very often. I don't do heavy editing very often. It's mostly just me kind of rambling. So I'm sorry if that's not what you're into and you came here from the Supercorp one. But I will be making another kind of scripted one because I do have a topic that I want to talk about that's pretty serious, and I think is kind of lends itself to that, and that's Netflix and you know, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, we've all heard that Teenage Bounty Hunters has been canceled, and Glow, and all these kinds of other shows, and Netflix just keeps announcing new things, like that Assassin's Creed show that they're doing, like, you know, and it just, there seems to be a sick pattern with all of it, and so I definitely want to talk about that, so I'm going to be working on that. That'll probably be my next episode, so get excited for that. But anyway, enough rambling. Sorry for this big long intro, but I just wanted to get that out there. Anyway, let's talk about Bly. So how I watched the show was I decided that I was going to only watch one episode a day as to not freak myself out. Which, honestly, I actually think that worked so well. I enjoyed that so much. Because, listen, if you know anything about me, you know that I hate binging. I hate it. I hate to binge watch a show because I don't know, it makes it feel like episodes are not pointless, but like they all blend together, and each individual episode just doesn't get appreciated as much as it should, you know? And that's why I really, really love when streamers will put out episodes like week to week. I love that. Listen, I'm a TV person, so I'm a sucker for like classic television, you know, every single week. You wait a week for the episode to come, you know, and you're left to like think about it. And that's what they're doing for Dickinson's season 2, so I'm really excited about that. Check that out in January. I also have an episode where I talked about season 1 of Dickinson, if you're interested in that. But so I kind of decided to do that for myself with Bly Manor, except not over 9 weeks, because that would have just taken so long, and it would have been like, the moment would have been so past. But over 9 days instead, with a couple breaks in between. I didn't get to watch it every single day, but I really enjoyed that process, and I thought it was really cool because it genuinely did allow me to like sit and like watch episodes and appreciate them for the works that they were, you know, beginning to end. And that just like, it was cool, and it helped me to remember things that happened in episodes more so than if I was just like watching it straight through, because like I said, they kind of like blend together. So but the first 2 episodes were kind of, you know, just like world building and kind of like, it led to them being the least memorable episodes for me. I mean, obviously the second episode where we get the backstory about Miles was really interesting, and it was very perplexing, obviously, you know, because obviously now we know that Peter has been in Miles's head this whole time. Obviously his actions make a whole lot more sense now. But before, you know, you're watching this and you're like, God, why is this child so like evil? Like, he's killing this bird. He's, you know, jumping out of trees. Like, what is wrong with him? And you kind of feel bad for the pastor who, you know, is trying to help him, and you know, it's kind of scary. And then he mentions the keys. Like, he's like, I had to find your key, like, to get home. And obviously that's something that they later then have Peter say to Miles, I think in episode 3. He's like, oh, it's about finding people's keys. Anyway, that's one thing that I do love about the show as well, is that everything kind of gets tied up. Every loose end, I think, is managed well, and everything kind of connects in a way that's really satisfying. And speaking of episode 3, that is where obviously the story kind of really starts to pick up, and we finally get, and this is called The Two Faces Part 1, and it's where we get the love story between Rebecca and Peter. And that was so interesting to me because then 3 episodes later is The Two Faces Part 2. But it's like so interesting because they didn't, they separated them. They separated their stories so well that it just was super effective. Because I think that if we found out all of the details of, Rebecca and Peter's story that early in the season, it wouldn't have worked. I think that even if they had pushed it back, like if we hadn't gotten that original like story about Peter and Peter and Rebecca originally, and they'd done 6 and 7, I don't think it would have worked well either. Like if they'd done part 1 and 2 in a row, just because it left so much mystery to be open. And I feel like the episodes in between would have, they wouldn't have had the depth that they ended up having without the knowledge of Peter and Rebecca. Because ultimately, I feel like their story and their demise, basically, like their downfall, is kind of like even though obviously, as we'll talk about later, like obviously Viola is the one, like her and her family are the ones who like started all. I feel like Peter and Rebecca kind of kickstart it for this family, for the kids, for Miles and Flora, and for the found family that lives, on Bly. So it's really cool, and to see that their relationship was so, it was like passionate and this and that, and then you go to episode 7 and it's like, oh my god, like it's so devastating. So yeah, it was, I really enjoyed to see that originally, even though I mean obviously the relationship is horrible. So then episode 4 was a standout for me personally. I'm normally not into flashbacks. It's why I have trouble watching Arrow, because I'm like, can't we just focus on the present? I don't want to look at the past. But this show used flashbacks extremely well. And it was just really effective for me to use all of these flashbacks instead of, because they could have easily had Danny talk to Jamie. Because in this episode 4, Danny and Jamie are kind of having this connection, obviously over whether or not to go to Owen's funeral, and she unzips the dress because Danny says, fine, I don't want to go, and Owen said it was fine, so I'm not going to go. And then she looks in the mirror and sees Edmund, right? Edmund, that's his name. Sees her fiance in the mirror, and that could have been, and like jumps, And so that could have been like a really interesting opportunity to just have her tell it to Jamie, but I think it was smart to just do the flashback and actually, never really tell Jamie about the ghost that's haunting her. Like, she says later that she had this fiance and I feel guilty, like, when I don't think about him, whatever. But, they could have had her, like, really, like, profess to Jamie, like, her issues and what she's struggling with. But they didn't. And I think that was an interesting choice. Especially because the show is really, it's about, I think the thing is that flashbacks work so well in this show, particularly because the show is about memories and it's about people's lives and it's about how those memories fade and change and how people's past can affect other people's future and how, everything that's done in the past will come back and potentially to haunt you, and I loved that about the show. But so I also, this has been pointed out online, but I have to say it because seeing Danny's story of both internalized homophobia and compulsory heterosexuality was really, really awesome. It was really cool to see her story play out because obviously she feels extremely guilty because she broke his heart the night that he died, literally 2 minutes before he died. But she feels more guilty about not missing him, I think, is the thing. Is she feels guilty that she doesn't miss him, that she didn't want to marry him and is glad that she didn't have to marry him, and she feels guilty that she's having these feelings for a woman, and multiple women, the girl who was putting her in her wedding dress, like and so she feels all of these things, and he, it's not about him haunting her, it's about the self-hatred that she has haunting herself, and I love that character's design. Listen, I love it. I love the glasses with the lights. I thought that was really cool. It's just a really cool design to have for this ghost, and I was so shocked when he just got plowed down by that truck. Oh my god. And I just, I don't know. I think it just worked so well, and it authentically told the story of this woman, especially during the time, it's like the 80s or whatever. It's not that it wasn't super okay back then, or at least not as accepted as it is now to be gay. And so it was really cool to see them be able to tell her story without having the coming, because most shows, when they do these, they pick the coming out story, and it's like everything, and it's this and it's that. But the thing is that Dani never had to figure herself out. She knows who she is, and she knew who she was, and she wasn't necessarily ashamed of that necessarily, but she had that, internalized homophobia and that self-hatred kind of keeping her in check, I guess, in the form of her ex-fiance. So I really loved that story, and I love Dani as a character. She's incredible. So then we have episode 5, which was so upsetting. And I cried multiple times during this show. One of them was when I think it was during this episode when no. It was during like 3, 4, and 5, because Owen was talking about his mom and her death, and I guess it was probably episode 5. Anyway, and so I cried then because that was really upsetting. And then I cried during this episode because I love Hannah Gross so much. She's such an interesting character. And watching this episode 5, just like as its own episode, was incredibly frustrating. It was incredibly frustrating and confusing, and I was getting sick of getting put back in the same memories and in the same places without knowing what was going on. But that's the goal. Like, that was the goal. They wanted us to feel like Hannah, because Hannah didn't know what was going on either. She was also very frustrated and confused and wondering why she kept getting thrown into these different memories, and why Owen was going off script, and, all of those things. So I think it was really effective, even though while I was watching it, I was like, what is happening? I want to know. Tell me. So once they did that final reveal at the end where you see that she's in the well, and actually I was a little confused because I thought that in that moment Hannah realized that she herself was in the well. But then later, I think it was around episode 7. It was either episode 6 or episode 7. I think it was 7. Yes, it was 7. Where Miles, who is possessed by Peter, shows Hannah her own dead body at the bottom of the well. I was so confused because I thought that she already knew. That's what I took away from the end of episode 5, but apparently that's not what happened. She just had become a ghost and she had no idea that her body was down the well. But it's so sad because thinking about it, and especially the show up until that moment, all the interactions that Hannah and Danny had, like, Hannah wasn't alive for any of that, which is so upsetting, and it just made me cry so hard because Danny never even got to know Hannah while she was alive. I mean, it's wonderful that she was able to get to know Hannah, even though she was a ghost, but it's still really upsetting. And I mean, obviously everybody kind of knew that there was something going on with Hannah because she wouldn't eat. She, would kind of drift off and not be aware all the time. And then she was seeing those cracks on the wall. And then when they did the reveal of the cracks, and that was the last thing that she looked at when she died, that was unbelievably upsetting. That was so sad. But it just, like, brought everything together. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Terrible. Literally horrible. So anyway, though, I love Hannah as a character. And especially when at the end of the episode towards the end of the episode where Hannah and Owen are talking and he says, picture it, Hannah Gross in Paris. And she's tries to go off script. She tries to say, yes, I will go to Paris with you. And he just gets up and leaves because it's not real, or she can't leave and she can't express that, and he goes and that's it. And it's just so, so sad because they deserved so much better. And their love, obviously I absolutely adore Danny and Jamie and their love, and obviously it was so heartbreaking, but honestly I think Hannah and Owen's was just a bit more heartbreaking, because they never even got to kiss. Like, they never even got to actually tell each other that they loved each other, and that was just so heartbreaking, just so heart-wrenching, because at least Danny and Jamie got those 13 years to be together. But it was just so sad. Oh God, Hannah and Owen. I love them so much. I think that's one thing too that I love about the show is that every single character you feel something for, because every character is so complex and so well-rounded and so well done that there's no one-dimensional character within this whole thing. I mean, Owen, even if some people might say, oh, well, he's just, this, like, soft guy, but he's not just this soft guy. Like, he clearly has this anger about his mother and about what the world, what life did to her, and his sadness as well as his anger. And so he's such an interesting character, and he's so compassionate, and I love that. I love that in a male character, because there was not a moment where he had this, any kind of toxicity or, like, just those gross qualities that male characters have, like, 99% of the time. The Peter Quint of it all, especially because we see the difference between him and Peter Quint, and even if I do, like, I think obviously Peter Quint is my least favorite character in the whole thing. I hate him. But even so, the show makes me feel that hatred for him. The show made me feel that emotion for him. So it was just so well done. Because I don't think the show wants me to like him. And I don't. He's awful. But, it just was really effective. And even, I'll talk about it later, but Viola in episode 8, the show doesn't want you to see her as just this, like, one-dimensional cold villain. Like, they paint this whole picture for you of a woman scorned and a woman, just dealt the shittiest hand in life. And so that's really cool. I really appreciate that about this show, that no one is 100% perfect and no one is 100% good. And everybody has their flaws, and it just works really well. So then talking about episode 6 was probably the freakiest of them all for me. I very much appreciated the idea that all of the ghosts were trapped at Bly, so that none of them could ever come to get me. That's the kind of logic that I have to use when I watch like horror movies or anything scary, really. Like, I have to be like, well, it's okay, because she's trapped at Bly and she can never come get me, so. But with episode 6, Henry saw his demon, when he was at his office. That's when he came to him at night and just grinning, and I loved that the reveal of that it was the last words that his brother had said to him was like, oh, you're like grinning devil or whatever he said. And that was the last words that he ever said to his brother. And then he died, like that was so brilliant. And I love that his ghost was more of a metaphor for his guilt over not only, just like leaving the last interaction with both his brother and his sister-in-law, who ended up being his lover. Their last interactions together before they died were obviously not good. But also just over, obviously over the fact that he slept with his brother's wife and he was in love with his brother's wife, and he's the father of Flora, which is insane. And like, Jamie was bold as hell to tell that story right to Flora's face. Like, thinking about it, I'm like, holy shit, she really said like, yeah, Flora, sorry, your uncle's actually your dad. Like, oh my god, Jamie, wild as hell. Old Jamie doesn't give a shit. She will tell you that your uncle is your dad, and that is it. But yeah, so I thought that was pretty scary, and to see him manifest. And I think, like I said, his ghost was kind of the least real of them all, not actually there, just in his mind, kind of similar to, I think more similar to Edmund than like Viola, because Viola obviously was a very real and tangible ghost, but I think that Henry's ghost and Edmund were more of like, not tricks of the mind, but like more psychological than practical, but I think this episode was really chilling in that way. And it was, I mean, come on, I knew right off the bat that baby was Henry's. Like, because when the dad comes rushing in, I can't remember the brother's name. Anyway, so when the dad comes rushing in and he's like, she said that this is way too early. And he's like, well, sometimes babies come early. And then they shared a look. Charlotte and Henry, they shared a look. And I was like, oh no, they're on the side. Oh God, it's terrible. But yeah, so I was just, I was really freaked out by this episode. I don't know, it felt oddly personal to me, because sometimes I like do embarrassing things and then I'm like haunted by it for days and days and days. And so I'm kind of like, this is basically what Henry's ghost is. Like, just like his own brain, like replaying all the horrible, moments of his life that he just wants to forget. And I think this was also the episode where Danny and Jamie talk about moonflowers, with Jamie obviously going into her past and talking about, and maybe it was the episode before. No, it was. Okay, yeah. Jamie talking about how, she had such terrible childhood and ended up growing up in like foster care and has, these siblings, and how she has such a hard time opening up to people because she feels like they aren't worth it. And that Danny was finally someone that she felt was worth it. And I love Jamie. I love Jamie so much, because like she said, like the moonflowers, she has so much to give, but, she doesn't know if the work will be worth it, to get just a glimpse of the flower, like for a day, And so I love that. And I love that she's a character that I can love and relate to so deeply. And I love that she was so open and vulnerable, and they got to have this huge conversation between the two of them, because I thought it worked really, really well, and I loved it. So then episode 7, which was just heart-wrenching. This is another episode that I cried at. I cried so much watching the show. I cried more than I was scared while watching the show. It was just so heartbreaking watching Peter take Rebecca into that lake when she clearly, that is not what she wanted. I mean, we all knew, because we're all privy to the fact that she is dead, And while they were having that conversation where he's like, all you have to do is say, no, that was terrible. Anyway, all you have to do is say, like, it's you, it's me, it's us. And I'll do everything you need for you. I'll just tuck you away, and for them to have that moment, and we all know what's coming, but Rebecca doesn't. It's just that awful dramatic irony of, oh my God, is he gonna walk her into the lake? And that is what he did. And to watch, like, that whole sequence where she's in the lake and then he leaves her body so that she has to drown, and she has to feel like she's drowning, for the rest of her existence at Bly. And her ghost is then on the bank crying, sobbing, just like totally breaking down with her body like floating in the lake. And poor little Flora is standing there at the edge of the lake looking, and she can see both of them, like Jamie, when she comes up, she doesn't see Rebecca, just wailing on the edge of the lake. She just sees her body, floating in the lake, and Flora standing there having discovered it, and when she just like picks up Flora and runs back to the manor, back just away from the lake. That was something that's where I cried. That whole sequence, just all of that culmination. It was so horrible. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the whole season is about possession and love. And they even say that sometimes people get that mixed up. And that is clearly the difference between Peter and Rebecca and Jamie and Danny, because Danny and Jamie's love was selfless and pure, and Rebecca's and Peter's, like, they literally loved each other to death. Like, that is what happened. And I love the contrast of Peter taking Rebecca into the lake versus Danny refusing to take Jamie, which obviously is like the overarching one of the themes of the show, and it really drove that home. I thought it was awesome. So then at the end of episode 7, we get that jump scare, which I knew it was coming because everybody was like, oh my God, the jump scare at the end of 7. So I was like, okay, I know it's coming. So I kind of had my eyes closed, like peeking through my fingers. But it was kind of crazy because they stay on that scene for so long. It's so weird, and it's so interesting because literally for 3 episodes, we either start or end with the same exact scene. So we end episode 7 with this jump scare of Danny getting just caught by Viola. Then episode 8 starts with that, so we pick up there, and then also ends with that, so we end there, and then episode 9 starts with that scene again, and I thought that was really interesting, and I think that it shouldn't have worked. It did work. It worked for me, but I think that it shouldn't have, because it should have killed the suspense, you know what I mean? Like, it totally should have killed the suspense, but for some reason, it didn't kill the suspense, and I don't know why. I don't know why it worked, but it did. Because, for 3 whole episodes, you left that like cliffhanger for 3 whole episodes. And then also, by the time episode 9 kind of rolls around, I'm like, geez, isn't she dead yet? Like, Peter was killed in like 2 seconds by Viola. How is Dani still alive? Like, not that I wanted Dani dead, but just that, how is she still living? Like, because it just felt like an eternity that she had been in Viola's grasp. But really, I mean, it wasn't, but still. But so episode 8, talking about that, episode 8 was a doozy. It's really cool because I think during that episode we get the true difference between Viola and Dani, and how the thing is, I was thinking about this before, about how when I talk about episode 9, I'll kind of talk about this, but about how Dani's story is kind of the best cancer story that I've ever seen told on screen. I don't watch a lot of cancer related media, but that's what it feels like. You're living, your time is ticking down, and they know that eventually one day Dani is gonna succumb to the beast, is what ended up happening in the show. But if you think about it in terms of like an allegory for terminal illness, that is what that's what happened. She succumbed to her terminal illness, basically, and so the difference between their terminal illnesses, Viola's and Dani's, and how it changed them in different ways, it's crazy. Like, because Viola, obviously, like, it turned her so bitter and hard and cold. And I mean, I get it. That's the thing about this episode, is you're watching it and you're like, I understand, because she's not this monster that you think she is. She's hurt and scorned, and the thing is that she was just dealt the shittiest hand by life, to get this like black lung and then have to live with it for so many years, because they were like, oh, she's got like 6 months, and then she was just too stubborn to die, so she lived with it for so long. Couldn't see her daughter, could hardly see her husband, her sister. She just became so full of rage, and it turned her into this vengeful and bitter woman. And on the other hand, Dani's ticking clock, which, we'll talk about more in episode 9, but is what happens in episode 9. It made her more compassionate and caring for her lover right up until the very end, because that is what drives her to the lake anyway, is that she was about to hurt Jamie, and that's the last thing that she wanted to do. And that's so interesting because, obviously we have 2 different sides of the same coin, kind of, where we have Viola, who throughout her time dealing with the black lung and everything, like I said, she was just turned so bitter and so cold and so ruthless and relentless, and was just so changed in a negative way by it, was so warped. And then you have Dani on the other side, who was not, who became almost more compassionate and more loving and more attentive and more appreciative of the time that she got with Jamie, during how she dealt with those 13 years of, Viola kind of looming over her, And I have sympathy for Viola. I mean, I don't necessarily view her as the villain either, I think that she, like pretty much every character in Bly, is extremely complex and had valid reasoning for acting like she did, especially after being murdered by her own sister. Like, that was crazy. And especially I love the way that they framed it, where Jamie was telling the story and she was like, her sister, I don't remember her name, her sister would say that this was a mercy killing, but it wasn't. And she knows that. And because she was like, mercy is the last thing on her mind when she's actually strangling Viola, which was just crazy. And then to to watch Viola wake and walk and sleep and do all of that in the chest. I thought that was really interesting because obviously she just so wanted to see her daughter again because she couldn't see her in life. Like, that's like I think that's the thing that turned her the most bitter of all, is that she didn't get to spend any time with her daughter because pretty much almost immediately after she had her, she became sick. She fell ill. And then they couldn't risk, giving it to the daughter. And it just was really upsetting to see that her sister was the one who opened the chest and then just strangle her. That was crazy. That was madness. And so after this episode, I was actually a big Viola supporter. I'm like, go off, queen. Go off, queen. You did what you had to do. But it was kind of just like gay brain being like Kate Siegel hot. Like, I mean, which valid, but I do think she deserves sympathy. And I think that her, quote, like, evilness is just, it's not black and white, Which brings me to episode 9, which I sobbed so hard over. Oh my God. First of all, in like the beginning, like, what, 5 minutes, 15 minutes? In the beginning when all that crazy shit was happening. When Owen found Hannah's body, I just started sobbing. I was like, oh my God. Oh, God, that was horrible. That was literally horrible to see that, and especially to hear that he was the one who insisted on cleaning her body, and oh my God, that was so horrible. It was horrible. It was terrible. And I hate that they assume, I like that they didn't make Owen realize that the last time that he had spent with Hannah, that she was already dead. I like that they didn't do that, because they could have, they could have been they could have had a scene where it was like, oh, the coroner said that she'd been dead for weeks. I'm glad that they didn't take that away from Owen, like her final moments, you know what I mean? Like, I'm glad that they didn't take that from her. But yeah, so that was really upsetting. And so then it was so nice to see Jamie and Danny get to live their lives for 13 years. And then to see Owen get his restaurant. That was so awesome, with the portrait of Hannah hanging on the wall. And then this was a controversial point, but to hear that the kids didn't remember their trauma, I was really happy to hear that. Because they didn't need to, and it's most likely due just to the fact that they spent so much time tucked away, in memories and stuff, because of Rebecca and Peter and all of them. They just spent so much time getting tucked away and getting, cast away, that it probably just messed with their minds. And they were just so young. And I'm sure it's also probably just PTSD. Just pure, self-preservation kicking in. But I was really glad to remember that they don't remember the bad. But it is kind of sad that they don't remember the good, because obviously Hannah was so good to them. Danny was so good to them. Jamie was so good to them. They remember Owen vaguely because he said that they came to the restaurant, and they remember Hannah's face, but they just don't remember, the details. And that is really upsetting, because that's their little found family. They don't remember. It's so sad. So then, the ending. So when Jamie finds Danny's body, and Danny refuses to take Jamie with her, or anyone ever again, I sobbed so hard. Also, the reveal that they were at Flora's wedding, and that Flora is actually her middle name, was really cute. I thought that was really good. And also, I just really, really loved Carla's portrayal of old Jamie. I thought that it worked so well, because you could tell that she was just so haunted, but also, continuing to live because it's what Danny wanted, and I loved the way that she did her accent, which she was so good at doing Amelia Eve's like accent that she has, and like the way, even just like the tempo of her voice and the way that she speaks with the diction, and just everything. It was so good because I knew, like, okay, even if I hadn't seen a spoiler that was old Jamie, I figured that it was her because she did such a good job with the voice. It was like in the beginning of episode 6, I was like, oh my God, this is Jamie's voice. But it wasn't. It was, it was old Jamie's voice. But she did such a good job. It was incredible. So let's talk about that final scene, which is, obviously something that so many people have so many different opinions about. And I've got my own little take on it. So Jamie says that Dany is destined to walk and wake and fade forever. But the thing is that Jamie is an unreliable narrator. And that's not, listen, I'm not saying that Jamie is a liar or that Jamie, said things like that on purpose or that she's misleading everybody. But you have to think about her perspective and what she knows, like the limits of her knowledge of even what happened, because she makes a point to say that she never went back to Bly after that one day of when she found Dany at the bottom of the lake. And I mean, obviously, I don't blame her, because I'm sure that she didn't want to wake up I'm sure that she didn't want to just like stand there and wait for her lover to walk waterlogged out of the lake and see her face all melted, like that's not what she wants to see. So I don't blame her, but she doesn't know what happened. She just assumes that she met the same fate as Viola, but I don't think so. I don't think we can trust her interpretation of what happened, because I don't think Dany was destined to wake and to walk at all. I think she was tethered to Jamie rather than Bly, because Viola's hold on the ghost was released the moment Dany made her promise. So I think that Viola's entire existence was freed from Bly the moment Dany fulfilled that promise 13 years later. And the thing is that Dany has no connection to Bly, not much anymore at least. She spent 13 years with Jamie, for far longer than she was ever at the manor. And someone on Twitter said that also maybe these ghosts are attached to objects, which I absolutely adore, because honestly, that is my belief of ghosts just in general, like in real life. If ghosts were to ever be real or exist, I think that they would have to be attached to objects or whatever, just because of people's strong feelings for their possessions. Which I love, and it shows, this theory kind of cements itself throughout the show, and I think this is probably the right, not to say that there's a right or a wrong interpretation, but just to say that this is kind of like maybe what they were going for, because Peter is connected to Miles via his lighter that he gave him. Edmund is connected to Dany via his glasses that she keeps, and then once she burns, he's no longer with her. Rebecca is connected to Flora via that hair thing, which is why she gets so mad about Dany having it. Hannah is connected to the well, which is why she sees the cracks in the walls. Viola is connected to the chest, which was then thrown into the lake. Dany is then connected to Jamie's wedding ring that she still wears to this day. As far as the final scene goes, I genuinely believe that Dany is always with Jamie, and she's probably mad that she always leaves the door open, because that is ridiculously dangerous. I mean, she's a ghost. She doesn't need an open door. Like, she can do whatever she wants. I think it would have been really, really cheap to have Dany show up in the sink or the bath water that Jamie draws. And it just would have connected her too much to Viola and the negative connotations that came with it. Because obviously at the end, Dany was just sitting there with her face like in the tub, just like looking at Viola. And I think that if they had had her show up like that for Jamie, even if it would have been like a really positive interaction, it just would have drawn too many connections to Viola and to like the kind of like angry, menacing Lady of the Lake that Danny knew at the end, you know? That's a parallel that I'm glad that they didn't go through with. So I think that Danny is always there with Jamie, and she's just waiting for the day that Jamie can be with her fully again. And another parallel to Peter and Rebecca is that Peter reveals his ghostly form to Rebecca, which, if you remember in episode 7, Rebecca is like, hey, I don't care, we'll move to America, and if people just see me talking to a ghost and they think I'm crazy, then I don't care because I'll get to be with you. And which, you know, she offered to like live her whole life talking to a ghost, you know, like that's the most surefire way to ensure that she is living in the past and she'll never move on with her life, you know. While Danny, even if she's tethered to Jamie, she refuses to let her live her life with a ghost and wants her to move on, because I think she knows that if Jamie knew that she could appear, you know, the same way that Peter did to Rebecca, that Jamie would always want her to be around, that she would gladly live her life with a ghost, you know, that same way. And I think that just drives home another theme about love being selfless. That Peter, who is selfish, could not keep himself away from Rebecca, even if it was for her own good. Whereas Danny, who, even though she's clearly able to appear to Jamie and able to show up and able to be with her and be around her and touch her and probably talk to her, she doesn't, because she wants Jamie to move on and to live her life and to just remember her the way that she was, not for this ghost, this memory, basically, you know? And so, and she just like refuses to let her be frozen in time the way that she is. I think it's also, it's connected to the way that she wouldn't let her come into the lake, you know? Like, this is also Danny refusing to drag Jamie into the lake. You know what I mean? Because even if Jamie is still in the world of the living, if she is like focused on Danny and focused on Danny's ghost, you know, she's never going to move on. And even though clearly Jamie hasn't moved on, but she still like goes about her life and lives and manages okay. Obviously she's still mourning for Danny, but I think that Danny knows that if she showed herself to Jamie, it would be, you know, her life would kind of be over. So in terms of the ghosts, I know that it's canon that they fade and wither away, but I love that it seems like their most prominent feelings stick with them much longer than anyone would expect. Like for Viola's sister, she was concerned about appearances and vanity while she was alive and seemed to be very insecure, which is what she was left with, even when she didn't remember that she had a sister to be murdered or to be murdered by. When Peter picks her up in the attic during episode 7, she hides her face and flinches, which means she's aware of both vanity and also the fact that she doesn't have a face to begin with. I loved that. And for Viola, she was left with so much anger and bitterness, obviously because her life was cut short and her abandonment by her family when they pushed her into the lake, that's all that remained as she became the Lady of the Lake. But that glimpse of her still just like having that love for her daughter so deeply ingrained into her, I loved that. In episode 9, when she picks up Flora, it does that flashback of, you know, her with a face picking up her daughter. I absolutely adored that because it gave her like a shred of humanity, you know, it gave her that like heart before, you know, we see her kind of as this monster that's tormenting Danny. For Danny, like she died with so much love in her heart and so much love in Jamie's heart that I don't think that she'll ever fade. That's just my belief. I just adored this show. I think it showed the most honest depiction of grief and pain that I've ever seen, and I loved every minute of it. And to everyone who says, oh, it wasn't as scary as Hill House, so it wasn't that good, like, you missed the whole point. Flora even says it's not a ghost story. It's a love story. And I think the scenes that hit me the hardest were when Owen finds out that his mother died while he was at Bly, and then the scene where Jamie tells Flora to live every single day, one day at a time, and to not worry about the end or people leaving you, which was really touching and really wonderful, because Flora just like breaks down crying in front of older Jamie at the wedding, thinking about living life without her lover, like if he were to pass before her, and she's like, listen, you just have to enjoy the time that you have. And I love how this was Netflix's big like blockbuster show, and they decided to have it centered around this lesbian love story. It just made me really happy to see. And this is the kind of content Netflix needs to push and to support. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do an entire episode about Netflix and how they work and originals and all the things and stuff. So be on the lookout for that. But you know, for this show and specifically for the Haunting franchise, it's, you know, relatively new faces. There's no huge names attached to it, or the names were made huge because of this franchise. You know, it's about heart and it's love, and it just feels like the Netflix of old, you know. And really quick before I wrap up, I want to talk about the barrier gaze trope in relation to this show, which I don't think applies. Danny loved Miles and Flora, and caring for a couple of kids is literally her passion and what she says to Henry in the beginning, and it's no surprise that she would give her life for theirs. I mean, of course she would. And she didn't die because she was gay. She died because she had an amazing selfless heart and couldn't live with herself if she just let Flora drown. I think they still got a pretty damn happy ending anyway, honestly. Especially in terms of the Haunting series. I've heard that just everybody's whole life goes to shit every single time. So I think they got away pretty good. Because they'll see each other again. It's canon. It's canon that Danny's always with Jamie, so they'll see each other again. It's okay. But yeah, I think that's it for me. I know I didn't obviously cover everything that this show had to offer. I just wanted to talk about it. I loved it so much, and I just wanted to go over the season and talk about it, and I especially wanted to mention that barrier gaze trope thing because I know that people have been talking about it. They're like, oh, you know, they killed the lesbian. But I mean, yeah, they did. But they also killed, you know, Hannah Gross, and they also killed, you know, Peter and Rebecca. And the thing is that I think that if like Hannah and Owen had got to live and be happy together and do this and do that, then, and maybe Peter and Rebecca had gotten to like live happily ever after, then it would be like, oh, maybe it's more leaning towards like barrier gaze, but nobody had a good ending. So yeah, I loved it. I loved the show. I might rewatch it, but I don't know if I feel like crying again. I cried so hard during that scene where she was at the lake that my nose started bleeding, so that was really fun. I was really upset by it. But if you haven't checked out this show, please do. It might be better to watch it now that you've known spoilers. I don't know. But if you haven't, please go check it out. I can vouch for it. It's not that scary. I was not frightened by it in the slightest. Just watch out for that jump scare at the end of 7. Other than that, it's not that bad. Yeah, so I just want to thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments below, or tweet me at Televised Pod and let me know. Yeah, be sure to follow, share, rate, like, subscribe, do all the things, and I will see you guys next time.